Best 6 Japanese 80s movies to watch this weekend. Japanese cinema has always had a unique flair compared to the Western movie-making industry. From the subliminal fairy tales produced by Studio Ghibli to cult classics like Godzilla and Hachiko, Japanese movies are an example of great storytelling, imagery, and sound. The Japanese cinema industry has been at its creative peak in the 1980s, leaving behind several masterpieces across different genres. Today, we present you the 5 Japanese 80s movies that are still relevant 30 years later. Number 1. Hachiko Monogatari. You're probably familiar with the Hollywood version of this movie, starring Richard Gere. Known as one of the most touching stories in the history of cinematography, Hachiko, A Dog's Tale is not only based off a true story that happened in Japan but also inspired by the 80s Japanese motion picture Hachiko Monogatari. The original Japanese movie is no less of a tearjerker than the latter American version, but it does include a lot more comic relief scenes as well. Number 2. Grave of the Fireflies. Truly a masterpiece produced by Studio Ghibli, Grave of the Fireflies is an animated movie. Number 1. Hachiko Monogatari. You're probably familiar with the Hollywood version of this movie, starring Richard Gere. Known as one of the most touching stories in the history of cinematography, Hachiko, A Dog's Tale is not only based off a true story that happened in Japan but also inspired by the 80s Japanese motion picture Hachiko Monogatari. The original Japanese movie is no less of a tearjerker than the latter American version, but it does include a lot more comic relief scenes as well. Number 3. My Neighbor Totoro. If you're looking for something a bit happier, or at least less devastating, than Hachiko and Grave of the Fireflies, give My Neighbor Totoro a try. Being one of the most successful Studio Ghibli releases to date, My Neighbor Totoro tells the story of 2 sisters who move to the countryside in order to be closer to their sick mother. They discover that the forest near their house is inhabited by fantastic creatures named Totoros, whom they end up befriending. It's a charming fairy tale of childish imagination, the perfect movie to keep your spirits up on a Saturday afternoon. Number 4. Akira. Akira is another animated cult classic from the 80s. However, it has much more of a political message than the Studio Ghibli works above. Set in the futuristic city of Neo-Tokyo, Akira tells the story of a motorcycle gang leader pursuing his best friend who got involved in a secret government project called Akira. The premises of the movie look like a typical SF story. You have your post-nuclear war world, a greedy political class, a rebel army, and a secret project as the main plot. But Akira transcends the boundaries of the SF genre by adding in a dose of human drama, which is what made this movie a classic of Japanese cinematography. Number 5. Godzilla, 1984. We couldn't not include Godzilla, 1984, in this list. As much as the special effects are pretty bad, the Godzilla movies are still a cult classic of Japanese cinematography. The original film came out in the 50s, and the 1984 one brings back another monster attack that happens 30 years after the previous one. If you liked Jurassic Park, you're likely to enjoy Godzilla. The action and warfare scenes are pretty intense. Number 6. Tanpopo. Tanpopo is an artsy and light-hearted movie that is all about food. The main story has to do with the trucker Goro, who stops by a struggling family-run ramen chain and decides to stay and help Tanpopo, Japanese for dandelion, and the nickname of the shop owner, grow her business. However, the main storyline is intertwined by a few unrelated vignettes, all of which have something to do with food. While the humor might get pretty dark at times, and some scenes are straight up PG-13, one thing is certain: Tanpopo is a fun ride that might leave you a bit hungry by the end of the movie. These were the 6 Japanese 80s movies that are still actual and praised to this day. You have your human dramas, your SF, your kaiju, monster stories, and your light-hearted fairy tales and comedies. Now all you have to do is choose one to start with.